Welcome everybody to our International Colloquium. Our online gathering this year takes the place of what should have been our biennial international conference for IASYM in Atlanta. And indeed, by every measure, we've just marked the end of an extraordinary year, one that has seen more dismantling, disorientation, dis-ease, and disruption than any of us might have imagined at its beginning. If the root meaning of the word apocalypse means unveiling, then certainly it has been apocalyptic. For those of us who research, teach, and practice ministry with young people, we see the multiple ways in which these times have had an impact on these commitments, impacts that are likely to be transformative and transgressive for years to come. The beginning of this new calendar year and this gathering provide a timely opportunity to reflect on some of these changes and to be mindful of the work that lies ahead of us this year. What's the narrative that we will construct out of this time? How will we choose to think about and engage our work? What has this meant for the young people in our care and for us as caregivers? We decided it would be beneficial to convene a truly international conversation that addresses these questions. And so we have around our virtual table 3 IASYM members who teach, practice, and do research in youth ministry to talk about what these times mean and will mean for our shared commitments. So I'd like to introduce all of you to, we have Dr. Beth Corrie, who is the Associate Professor in the Practice of Youth Education and Peace Building at Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. We have Dr. Graham Stanton, Dean of the Center for Children's and Youth Ministry and Lecturer in Practical Theology at Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia. And Dr. Garth Aziz, the Senior Lecturer and Researcher of Practical Theology at the University of South Africa in Pretoria. So welcome, friends, welcome. We are going to start today with a very basic question. I'd like us to go around the virtual table and talk about observations of the disruptions that you've seen in 2020 to your communities, to the ways in which people behave and engage with each other, to understandings of things, any of the disruptions you've observed. And just to start things off smoothly, I'll turn the virtual mic over to Graham Stanton first to give his observations.
You know, we noticed that certainly there was an impact on young people that was in a sense, not really the focus of discussion. You know, the focus of discussion really was on obviously the survival of older people that got the illness. There was a lot of concern for preserving life. There was a lot of concern for preserving the economy. And I think likewise across the world, there's been that debate, you know, what's the cost of a life, which is a pretty brutal conversation to have. I think what sort of escaped attention, particularly early on, was the mental health impact on young people, the disproportionate impact of mental health on young people. And I guess I'd probably add in that I think there are questions for us as a society in how did we help young people through this? I think a lot of there was a lot of mental health struggles for young people. I'm not sure that adults really helped that situation. I think there was a lot of fear rhetoric in the media, and certainly there was caution that needed to be expressed. But then I'd say on the other hand, there was a lot of resilience that we saw in young people. You know, often where churches had to do that quick pivot to video streaming and everything, it's like the revenge of the gamers. Finally, those teenagers that have been sitting in the back thinking that they're the social outcasts, suddenly everybody wants their skills, and some of them have really risen to that challenge. You know, some of them have found the whole shift to online learning just totally ideal. So I think, Helen, what you said before about this pandemic being apocalyptic, sort of revelatory, I've had that sense of it's been a bit of a lens which has, I think, clarified those who are doing well continue to do well, and some of them really thrived. Those who were not doing well have really not done well, and many have fallen through the cracks.
And so now I come speaking to you from a country that is completely polarized, in which we are now having as many deaths per day, that is rivaling what happened on 9/11 about every day or every other day. And we're numb to it. And apocalyptic was the exact word that I would use on so many levels, because we also had, and I know it had international ramifications as well, we had several other pandemics happening at the same time, which is racial reckoning, and an explosion of protests and an awakening and a new conversation around race that was new for some people. And at the same time, we also had a presidential election, which should be over by now, but is not. And this has added to the immense anxiety that's happening. And the way I see this relating to young people, all the things that Graham said about the mental health issues and that the adults did not help. I mean, the fear mongering, then you have to add on the layer of literally tear gassing protesters in the street, most of whom were young adults, right? So the ramping up of fear is huge, but it's also a demonization of young people. These are all the young people that are on our streets, that are part of this racial awakening, that are part of this awakening to democracy and the need. I mean, the bright side was the level of civic engagement, the amount of people that were signing up to work at polls, to get out the vote, even if they couldn't vote themselves. Like, the level of activism that young people are engaging in, and they're being demonized, and their causes are being dismissed. What has been unveiled is how terrible online learning can be for some. It's fantastic for others, just like Graham has said. It's been a break from bullying for some young people. It's been a break from social pressures for some young people. But it's also been a moment in which, if your entire identity has been wrapped around what you do at school and who you are at school, having that being disruptive changes your sense of vocation, your sense of identity. And I don't think we've paid enough attention to the cost of that in terms of mental health.
It's been a really difficult journey in the South African context. And what makes it more difficult in the South African context is because our society is so polarized because of our historic past, with regard to apartheid and oppression. And so what makes it worse is, in our society, we have the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, those with access and those that don't. And it's created quite a bit of tension within the community. So we've found quite a bit of engagement about, where the haves would have more liberties of risk-taking within the context, and those who do not have, would have to be in a situation where they would have to be more vigilant of these type of things. Our young people have been engaged with issues of, as I mentioned, gender-based violence, racism, which is basically, it's just something that we live with as South Africans from our past. So when one talks racism and identity politics, it's not shied away within our communities. And so we've also had that with the Black Lives Matter movement abroad. We've also had it locally, where during the lockdown we had extreme police violence. And we've also had folk that were reported killed at the hands of police. And so that also sparked it. But our young people in South Africa have always been instrumental in protests, dating as far as 1976 with the Soweto uprising. So young people activism in South Africa is no new thing to us. We saw that a few years ago with the Fees Must Fall, the Roads Must Fall campaigns, which also started at the hands of young people. So South African young people have never been shy, if I could use that word, to protest and to call for accountability and for change. And we still see this continuing to this day. However, young people's engagement in churches is a bit, I don't know, enigmatic. It depends on the church tradition you find in, but oftentimes young people are not given the same platforms that they have in social societies within the church. So oftentimes they are seen as the folk that should be seen and not heard. So I think within the church, we don't often find youth activism as much as what we find them within the public sphere. So that is something that I find always a bit strange. And during the COVID, we saw something similar where the decisions made on how to do church were again from the older folk and not from the younger folk. And interestingly, though, I've always seen that the church was trying to play catch up with where the young people were at. So all in all, South Africa has we've had a difficult year. As I said, economy, unemployment, schooling, access to schooling was extremely tough, very Polaroid. In South Africa, we have what we call government schooling and also private schooling. And private schooling has all the access, internet infrastructure, technological hardware, etc. But the public schooling do not have that. So we found that the private schooling, generally the school year was almost uninterrupted because they were able to still continue with their syllabus and curriculum up until this point, whereas the public schooling basically came to a standstill.
So I would pose the question to you this way. When we talk about the impact the upheaval has had on young people, where can those of us who work with youth and love young people step in to make up for those gaps that have been revealed and the lack of fidelity in the structures of economy, society, sometimes even church as a guarantor of the well-being of young people?
The interesting thing that I saw in a number of youth ministries, the ones that were more successful in navigating this, the crisis and the complexity, the ones who were able to continue to provide that sort of container that you talk about, Helen, were the ones that were able to really think very carefully about their purpose. What is it that ministry was actually about? We got really good at running now an online program versus running a face-to-face program. And yet within that, the question, what's actually going on for the young people, sort of got left behind. I was with a group of national leaders, and they were asking the question, how are young people experiencing God in the midst of this pandemic? I was fascinated that A, they didn't know, and B, they didn't know that they didn't know. As in, until I asked them the question, there were so many that said, oh, that's a really good question. And they could tell me who was turning up, who had their video on and who didn't, what was happening with homeschooling. But, those really fundamental questions about what it is that we're trying to serve young people with in this youth ministry of, accompanying them in their journey of relationship with God. How is that going? And so I think the second lockdown in Melbourne did enable us to say, hang on, we can't just do the same thing again, kill me now if we've got to go back to that Zoom thing. And so I think one of the changes was that was useful was digging into that sort of personal devotional life thing, the personal practices of Christian faith when turning up isn't possible. Church and turning up is a Christian practice. It had become, I think, our only practice with young people. And so there was a lot of discussion around that, I think, in a number of youth groups that were doing that thinking into purpose. And I think that was really useful.
Without my home church, I saw the struggle of how to do church online without thinking about what church is. And so it was trying to duplicate what happens on a Sunday to an online platform. And it was completely misplaced. It seemed like it did not make sense. And I was struggling with this quite a bit. And I asked quite a bit of friends in youth ministry as well. How are you guys engaging with our online thing? Because now we have this channel surfing but with churches. So you go onto YouTube or to Facebook and you can just flip between the various services that you choose, or that fits your profile, or that's more fun. But that was only geared towards a certain demographic within the country. And I think beyond that, there was a question that I just couldn't put my finger on. And I think more and more it unfolded to me. It's this whole thing of how do we create community within this context? Whereby they not only form part, but they inform what this community should look like. We need to ask young people, how do we understand this community? It was always frowned upon. I remember when, the minister would come up to the pulpit and he would say, open your Bibles, and to the young people, please put away your phones. It seems to be a reversal of what he said. So, but it's this, I think it's the struggle for community. And I think as the adult community, I think we've missed it. I think it was about just how do we continue to do church and not experience a disruption in our normal worship experiences. But we haven't realized that community was disrupted and changed. And so I think it's as youth ministers and youth workers, I think that's maybe one of the questions that we should ask as well to our young people. What is community to you and for you?
I'll just add a little bit to build on that. I mean, I've thought a lot about Andrew Zersky's book, Beyond the Screen, and how he, his main thing is like, youth, they don't use technology because they like the bells and whistles. They use technology to get koinonia, to get to community. But because of all the ways in which they're separated from each other, because they can't drive, and we live in communities where you can't bike to people's houses, but there's all kinds of restrictions that keep them from physically getting together, they use technology for the end of creating community. And that if we look at it that way, then we can be a lot more empathetic about when they have their phones out all the time and the things that adults complain about. And one of the things that this moment has sort of, again, unveiled is now all of us know how much we need community, and we're got to figure out which technology we can use to get it. Zoom and the internet more broadly and Facebook and all of these things, they're just the latest versions of the telephone, the letter, the ways in which we've tried to create community and stay in contact with each other, right? Paul's letter to, Ephesians, right? He's trying to build community and stay in touch and find a way, right? And so, but what we miss is it's the adults who get caught up in the bells and whistles. And we project that, in my view, onto the young people and say, oh, it's so rude the way you're always on your phone, while we are constantly on our phones too, as if we're not doing the same thing. And so I guess, to Helen's question again, what can we contribute? Well, part of it, I want us to contribute to actually getting honest. Zoom is going to help us do something. The Jackbox games are going to help us do something else. We can get really good at I really want to highlight again both what Garth and Graham was saying. Like, a lot of people decided we're just going to take exactly what we used to do and move it online, and that's going to be fine. And what that exposed is that what we used to do wasn't working anyway. And so then we put it into technology, and that just makes it super honest. Because if you have good relationships, then getting on Zoom can generally work fine. There's awkwardnesses, there's things you can't quite do. But, what can we contribute? We could contribute to this conversation with young people about what technologies are you finding that actually help you meet your need of community and building relationships. And then how can we adapt that to continue to build community in new ways? And again, I want to underscore that both Graham and Garth said, with youth, not on youth, not for youth, not to youth, but with youth, figuring this out.
I love what you said, Beth, about the honesty with ourselves and with the young people. And it is that it's being the adult in the room to not be just taken up with the way that we can do things, but digging into the why, the what's going on below here. What are our bigger goals here. So as we talk about not just connection, but fellowship, koinonia, that's bringing a theology into our practices. And that's what I think we really do need to contribute. How do we actually give them not just the technology that enables us to deal with the limitations of the moment, but a theology, a way of thinking about life that recognizes that, yeah, this is not unexpected. This is not something that has to throw out all the things that we've been thinking about God and the world and ourselves and our community. Actually, here's a moment to dig into those things. And if we can dig into that sense of real community, then there's great and enduring strength in that and benefit for young people.
What I'd be interested in hearing from you folks is, what are we leaving behind as a result of 2020 that you are happy to leave behind?
What I want to leave behind is this pretending that we're something we're not. This pretending that we've got it together. Like, we actually never had it together. And I think that's what was so alienating, has been so alienating for young people, because we've been lying to them and saying that we had it together, and now we don't, and we're trying to pretend that it's not, and they can see right through it, right? I want to leave behind pants. I want to leave behind, like it, I say that as a symbol, like a symbol of the fact that we wake up every day and we put these huge masks on so that we can go and pretend that we're something that we're not. And that's what we're socializing young people to do. And what this moment has revealed is, like, you know what? It's okay if my students see that my cat walks across the screen. That actually doesn't mean they respect me less as someone as a conversation partner, right? It's okay if some of my students show up late because, you know, they had to get their kid off to school. Like, this really doesn't matter anymore. And I kind of wish we could continue to just, like, not let things matter the way they've mattered. That things that don't matter should stop mattering. I want to leave that in 2020.
I would love to leave behind that hectic mobility and frenetic pace of modern life. And I've heard that a lot from young people as well. So friends, during lockdown, and particularly as the signs of us emerging from lockdown were coming, young people saying, you know what, Saturdays have been really lovely. Just being able to sit at home and walk to our local park, and we haven't had to get in the car and drive to sport and all that sort of thing. They could see that, and yet at the same time, one of the things they were looking forward to about coming out of lockdown was getting back into sport and to be able to see their friends and everything else. So there's certainly a challenge and a tension there.
What I would want to leave behind is this whole thing of certainty, because we just do not know. We just don't know anything. We don't have it all together. I was trying to think of the Olaf song in Frozen 2, where he mocks adulthood, where we parade around thinking that we have all the answers to the universe and to all the problems. But even within church, we just do not know. There is no certainty. And I think if we can leave behind this thing of we know it all, we have it all together, and perhaps we would get a glimpse of the journey our young people are facing. And if we can leave behind this whole thing of we certain of what we're talking about, I think it might create a better journey with young people, a better relationships within the church, where, as adults, we can sit with young people and they might ask questions that we can honestly tell them, I don't know. Let's find out together. Let's see where this is heading. Because if 2020 has proven one thing, it is this, that there is no certainty. And I think perhaps a sense of vulnerability from us as adults could add a lot to where we are. So what do we leave behind? I think certainty.
These comments are a great segue to our last question, and it has to do with imagining the story of Pentecost, particularly in Acts 2, as a scriptural way of understanding the disruptive moment we've gone through.
Well, I wanted to kind of look at the text again, or parts of the because the part that really stuck out to me when rereading it was the quote from the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young will see visions. Your elders will dream dreams. What if our young are having visions and we just haven't asked them what they are? What if we're missing the Holy Spirit that's coming through and having these moments? That's kind of what comes to mind first.
If one wants to liken it to a Pentecost moment, I think and like Beth, I haven't made this connection yet, but it could possibly be, and might seem like a bit of a cop-out here. It might be something that I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I do know what it will not look like. And I think it's this whole concept of what Beth mentioned earlier on, that we took what we thought we were doing right, putting it on online platforms, and it was completely wrong. And perhaps this is an undoing of this wrongness and creating a leveling of the playing field where we could all sit together, young and old, and say, so where to? What is this going to look like? How do we redefine church? Is it the building? Is it the calling out? Is it the missional church? How do we experience God in all of this? So that is scary and exciting.
I wonder whether what COVID has done for us is really drive us back to purpose, back to ask those questions. What is the good life when you can't hang out with your friends, when you lose your job and you can't go to Bali for schoolies? But they're the right questions to ask. What is the good life? If COVID has been able to obscure the promises of the gospel, then they're the wrong promises. We've been chasing the wrong thing. And so again, we're back to that revelatory moment. The Spirit of God has continued to blow. The work of God has continued. And as Beth, you've said, yeah, there are visions and dreams that have been happening. Pay attention to those things, because God's enduring purpose has not changed. This is not new, that sense of being out of control. There have always been deep anxieties in the world, and the promise of Christ has always been this enduring peace, not around the darkness, but within and despite it, because we are Easter people, and hallelujah is our song.